Tanja, it's good to see you, and I want to let you know that on behalf of victims of domestic violence, and to honor the 62 individuals in our state that lost their life as a result of domestic violence, we appreciate your willingness to work with us this year to just raise awareness in our community about domestic violence. So, Tanja, you and I have talked briefly about your situation and the impact that domestic violence has had on your life. Would you like to share with our friends a little bit about what you've experienced?
Sure. My parents divorced when I was about 5, and we were living in Germany, and my mother met another man, and when I was about 8, or maybe a little bit before that, he moved us to New York. And once he got us out of Germany, he started, with small things like we had to call him Daddy. We couldn't talk about my real father.
It's painful.
He didn't ever really hold a job that I remembered much. My mother worked but didn't drive, so she relied on him to take her to work and bring her back. And so while she was gone, he pretty much did whatever he wanted to do. And a lot of times it was, well, I will tell you, I don't remember a whole lot about my childhood up until I was 12. But what I do remember is there was always a lot of yelling, and we were always very afraid. And when I was almost 9, he began molesting me, and I didn't find out till almost 4 years later, my sister also. And, he told me that if I ever told anyone, that he would leave my mother and we would be basically out on the street because she didn't drive and she relied on him, and basically that I would ruin everybody's life. We moved around a lot, and a lot of times it was in the middle of the night. He would come home and from wherever it was that he had been, and we would pack whatever it was that could fit in the car, and that was it. We were gone. And a lot of my memories now are just pictures. I don't remember, I can't give details really. All I can do is I see it, and I know inside. We didn't say anything to each other, as kids didn't. Altogether, I have a bunch of siblings now, but then there were 4 of us. And when my parents divorced initially, my brother and my second oldest sister, who was my dad's biological oldest child, stayed with my father in Germany. And my mother took my oldest sister, who she had by another man, and me, because I was the baby, with her. And so later, when we were still in New York, my father decided that he couldn't handle my brother anymore, and he sent my brother to live with us. And what I find really funny is that I didn't realize up until a couple of years ago that my father knew where we were. I always thought that he had lost track of us and couldn't find us, and that's why everything that happened to us happened, because he didn't know where we were. And it wasn't until a couple years ago that I realized he paid child support the whole time we were gone, and he sent my brother to live with us. He knew where we were. Well, my mother's boyfriend, when my brother came to live with us, he would get into a lot of trouble. Well, rather than punishing him, he would take it out on both of us, on me and my brother. Not my oldest sister, and I'm not really sure why. But I remember clearly that he was wanting to know who did something, and my brother, of course, wouldn't confess to it. I didn't do it. But he made us drop our pants and bend over the coffee table, and he hit us with a belt over and over and over again. My mother was sitting right next to him and, of course, didn't say anything. And he told her while he was doing it, well, I know Tanja didn't do it because if she had done it, she would have confessed by now. But he still continued to hit us. Later, it got a little bit worse. I guess because what he was doing to us and the fact that my brother was there, I guess for whatever reason he thinks that all male family members and female family members sleep together. I'm not sure. But he accused me and my brother of sleeping together. And he walked in one day and we were throwing a doll back and forth. And he grabbed the doll, and it was one of those dolls that had the plastic head and feet and hands and a stuffed body. And he hit us with it until it just burst open. And then he got a hanger and hit us with it until, I guess until he felt like stopping. And I remember going to my room and laying down and just wishing my mother would come home. And when she came home, she went into my room and I told her what he did to us, and she said something to the effect of, we probably deserved it. So, I stopped telling her anything because it didn't do any good, obviously, and he still continued to do what he wanted to do. We were never really taken to doctors. The only time I was ever remember getting medical treatment was when I was hit by a car. And the only time my sister got medical treatment was when he yanked her down the stairs and dislocated her collarbone. Wow. And my brother they never took him to a doctor. I woke up one morning towards the time when we finally ran away, and I walked downstairs and he was choking my brother, and he was trying to shove a pack of gum that was unopened down my brother's throat because he thought he stole it. Well, my brother was coughing up blood, but of course we couldn't do anything about it. I mean, all we could do is just sit there and watch and hope that we all made it out. When we got to Indiana, we moved near his parents, and his dad was so much like him, and we weren't really allowed to have friends. We walked back and forth to school. We lived in not the great part of Indiana. And I remember I tried to bring a friend home once, and we got to my house, and I was 10 or 11, and his father told her that I was gay, which I'm not. I'm pretty non-sexual, actually. But, and so she didn't want to be around me, obviously, and they just alienated us from everybody. The last house we lived in before we ran away, there was urine on the walls. There were bats and rats and all kinds of stuff. It was Indiana had these things that were like 4 apartments, and him and my mother bought it, and they knocked the walls out between the apartments, and his parents stayed in the same area. And, my room was right across from his room, and which gave him pretty easy access. And at that point, my mother was sending my sister and I to take naps with him. And 11 years old, I think that's a little inappropriate. I mean, I certainly wouldn't have my daughter go take a nap with my husband. But she did. And finally, Friday 13th, 1981, 5 days before I turned 12, my sister got us up one morning. He had taken my mother to work, and while he was at work, my sister said we were running away. By then, my mother had another baby. She had a baby by him, and he was 6 months old. And so we got him, and we took him with us, and my sister's boyfriend came and got us in this church van. We were trying to figure out where to go, but knew that he would look at the church and he would look at the boyfriend's house, so we went to the Indianapolis Police Department. And they interviewed all of us individually and couldn't really use any of my stuff because they said I didn't know the exact dates of what happened. And I was too young, I guess, to testify. And in 1981, they really just didn't really talk about it all that much. So they sent us to this place called the Children's Guardian Home, but not before he called the police department and said that someone kidnapped his kids. And they told him that they had us up there and to come up there. And so he came up there, and we saw him as they were taking him back to the cell area, and he turned around and was laughing at us. In the Guardian home, we were separated into different dorms. I was in the little girls' dorm. My sister was in the big girls' dorm. My brother was in the boys' dorm. And we stayed there a couple months and didn't see each other. We weren't allowed to talk to each other. We couldn't look out the windows. We couldn't wear our own clothes. In my dorm, we had to go to bed by 8, but not before 8. We couldn't sit on our beds. We had to go to school before all the other kids and didn't leave to come back till after everybody else had been gone. We had visitation days. My mother came once, I think, to say that she would stand up for us. My sister ran away from the Guardian home to my aunt's house in Ohio, and she told my aunt what happened to us. And so my aunt got in touch with Red Cross, and they were attempting to find my father. Shortly after she ran away, we got put in separate foster homes. I had a really good foster homes. They were very caring, and for whatever reason, I connected with the father. His name is Mike. And I bonded with him. I stayed there about 4 months, and then they found my father, and he took us back to Germany. And, we had gone to court proceedings and custody hearings, and my mother was supposed to come visit us at our foster homes, and she would say that she was coming. I'd walk to the bus stop and then find out later on that she wasn't coming. She came once while I was in the foster home. She talked to each of us individually and told us the other ones were lying, and that if we came and moved back in with her, that everything would be okay. None of us fell for it, and she told us she would stand up in court for us. And we went to one of the hearings, and all I remember hearing was that the case was called as Day versus Day. Day is my maiden name. So she wasn't standing up for us. She said, I wasn't at the trial itself, but she said that nothing ever happened to us. And that, out of everything, I think I've always been more angry with her than him, because what she did to me was, I'm a part of her, and she didn't protect us, and she turned on us after she found out. And I just don't, everybody says you have to forgive or you're going to hell, and that's always been a major thing for me, because I can't, because I know I have got kids, and I would never, ever do that to them. I mean, she took away my mother. And so what it does to you, and I don't think a whole lot of people understand that when you go through something like that, it really just changes you. And it takes away a lot. I mean, you hear the phrase, so ugly a mother could only love them. Well, I grew up thinking, what is so horrible about me that my own mother didn't even love me? And, I always doubt myself, and I always have major trust issues. I generally look for the bad before I see the good, because, it's so hard to think that everything's going to be okay. Because I've been there before. I've thought everything was going to be okay. We went back to my father. He never wanted us to talk about it. Because, I guess it was because he felt guilty that we went through that. Found out a couple of years ago that he had said, when my mother met that guy, that he was just going to step aside and let him be our father. Again, I have kids. I know that if me and my husband were to divorce, and I didn't hear from my kids, I would be hunting them down. I could not let 4 years go by and not know what's going on with my children. I mean, I just couldn't. And I don't really understand how anybody could. Now what I face is, it still feels very shameful. And my family really doesn't understand. My husband, has a hard time because there are a lot of triggers. And it's very hard, like things like being intimate are extremely hard. I have a hard time because I don't know how everybody else feels about things. Like how the general population feels about things. I just know how I feel, and to me that's normal. So, I don't get the big deal about wanting to be intimate. I would rather, hug you, kiss you, and go to sleep. And for him, that's hard, and I understand that. And, I always look for people to hurt me. And now I'm in counseling, and I found my foster father in 2009 via Facebook. Shout out to Facebook. And got back in touch with him, and actually went to see him in June of 2009. And they still live in the same house that they lived in when I was there. And we went to the neighborhood that I lived in and found the house. And it, of course, is boarded up and all that good kind of stuff. Went to the guardian home, and there was actually a lady that worked there still when I was there in 1981. I tried to track down my records because, for me, everything's so unreal. Like I said, I only see it in pictures. I can't really articulate too much of anything. But all the records got damaged in some kind of flood in Indiana. Since then, I got there the week that they were actually closing the guardian home. It's turned into some judge's office or something like that, and they've decided that instead of a guardian home, they were putting kids immediately into foster care. But, I almost backed out of talking because it is, people, my coworkers, they're like, what are you doing here? And I was almost ashamed to say, well, I'm going to be talking about this. because it is 30 years later, and it still hurts. And there's not very many people that understand that. I mean, most people, and myself included, think, well, you should be over that by now. It was 30 years ago. You're an adult now. That's not happening. But
you don't deal with it, Tanya. You just repress it. You just push it down and just go to work. Just push it down and do the laundry.
oh, absolutely. I keep extremely busy. And it's when things get quiet or when I talk about it that it's right there.
But the way for the pain to go away and to heal is to face the fear and do it anyway.
Yeah.
So brave. My gosh, you are so brave. And I'll tell you this much. When your story airs on that big screen next Friday night, you're going to touch a lot of hearts, Tanya. And the reason you're going to touch a lot of hearts is because there's a lot of people your age that have experienced pretty close to what you've experienced. And so for them to have a sense of community because you were brave and you said, well, I got butterflies, but y'all do it. You're so brave. Thank you. You're a very courageous individual. You really are.
I don't know about that. It's just one day at a time.
Yes. But you know what? I think that you're incredibly strong because a weak person wouldn't be able to do the things that you do. Okay? It takes somebody strong and steel to keep on trucking, even in the face of it. So you've got a lot to be proud of. And I want you to know that shame is just all a part of it. But that too, in time, will just kind of fade away.
I've been waiting for that.
Well, as far as the forgiveness, I would say don't sweat over that. That will come with time,
I forgot the most important part.
Okay?
He died.
Did he?
Well, she married him first. She told the judge that she wanted, he gave her a choice between her kids or her boyfriend. She chose her boyfriend. They gave her back the baby. I haven't seen him since I was 12 and he was 6 months old. She married him in 2004. He died in his sleep of a heart attack. That pissed me off. I was thinking, some type of disease where body parts would be falling off or something. In his sleep. And it just doesn't seem fair.
Yeah. I understand that.
And they say, for the longest time I did not want kids. I had decided when I was in high school I was never going to have kids because all they talk about in school is the cycle of violence. And how it repeats itself. And how if you're abused, you're going to abuse. And I never, ever, ever wanted to do anything to anybody, even remotely close to what was done to me. Because I never wanted to make anybody feel that way.
Yeah.
But that's not true. I mean, you're either going to go that path of what you've learned, or you're going to be opposite of it.
Do the direct opposite, absolutely.
And thank God I'm the direct opposite and overprotective instead of hurtful.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you for being a good mom, Tanya, really. I mean that. As a woman and children's advocate, I honestly thank you that you love your children and you're working hard to be a good mom. You put your own issues aside, and you're being a good mom. And that takes a strong person. It really does. Okay?
I'm here tonight because of my daughter, Stacy, was a victim of domestic homicide. She was 25 years old, This happened in 2003, and Stacy was a very happy person. She was a very likable person. She was a teeny tiny little girl. She was only 5 foot tall, but she had a lot in that 5 foot. And everybody knew her by her smile. Everybody loved her smile. Stacy and Curtis were married in 1996, and they seemed to have a happy family. Caleb was born in 1998. Never saw any problems other than, the typical arguing between, husband and wife, the things that would happen normally. Well, in January of 2003, started noticing some little things that Stacy was doing that was different. And she came to the house one day and was talking about how Curtis was treating her, which we always knew that Curtis had anger issues, because he was really quiet, but if he ever got mad, he was very violent. And so we talked that afternoon. Stacy went home, thought everything was okay. And the 16th of January, Stacy called us at 4 o'clock in the morning. Curtis had tried to choke her, said he had her down on the ground and was trying to kill her. And she was screaming for Caleb to go get help. Caleb was only 4 years old, and she was trying to get him to go get her help, to come and get Curtis off of her, and said the only thing she could think of was to pray. And when she started praying, he turned her loose. Well, from that moment on, she moved out of the house. She moved in with us, and her and Caleb was getting on with their lives. We thought, everything was okay. She filed for divorce, and everything seemed to be okay. Curtis was okay with the divorce. They, everything went. They divided everything up. Everything was fine, and she had bought her a new house, bought her a new car. Like I said, her and Caleb were moving on with their lives, and thought everything was going to be okay. Never dreamed in a million years that we would get the phone call we got. And probably the worst day of my life to receive that phone call. And Curtis had, which the last 2 weeks before this happened, he had started following her, stalking her. He would go to where she worked and sit in the parking lot, and he watched Caleb when Stacy worked. He had Caleb, and then Stacy would pick him up after she got off work. Well, he would take Caleb into Zaxby's and sit in a booth and just sit there and watch her while she worked. And finally the owner of Zaxby's told him, he couldn't do that anymore. He can't just go in and sit and watch her. And so on that morning, he went to Zaxby's. This happened in April of 2003. He went into Zaxby's, told her he wanted to talk to her, took her outside. She walked outside with him, and he shot her 3 times right there in the parking lot. And he ran. Like a coward that he was, he ran. From April till July, he was on the run. Nobody knew where he was. And in July, he turned himself in and said that he thought Paulding County was looking for him.
As Nana said, as I was there the night that Curtis tried to strangle my mom, all I could hear was her screams, and I didn't know what to do because I was at a young age, and all I could do was scream and tell my dad to let her go. And after that, when I went to their house, I was holding a teddy bear and screaming, crying, because I felt my mom's pain and I could see her tears. And after that, I don't remember much anymore.
And then what happened? Then you went to live with your grandparents after that?
Yes. I moved on in my life.
And did you ever see your father again after that?
I went to go see him last year at court.
At court.
Yes.
And how did that go?
It was at first, when it came through with those shackles over his hands, I wanted to cry, but then I toughened it up and remembered he was the one that killed my mother. And to this day, I'm still kind of mad at him.
Yeah. And it's okay. That's okay. And so, what do you think when you saw him all shackled up, that at first it provoked emotion in you? Did you kind of feel sorry for him, or?
I kind of felt sorry for him, but then I told myself, why should I feel sorry for him? He did something that was very bad to my mom.
Domestic violence is real. It's something that you never think about. You hear it on the news every day. You see it in the papers, and you think about those people, but you forget about them until you get that phone call, and it really happens in your life. That it can really happen to you. And it's the worst thing in the world. We forget about the pain that goes through these people's lives when it happens. It don't just happen to the person that was killed or the person that's being abused. It affects the whole family, the whole community. Everybody that knew this person, it affects them. And domestic violence is real, and if what we're saying here tonight can help one person get out of an abusive relationship, it's all worth it, because her life wouldn't be in vain if, we can just help one person see that, it's not always the physical abuse, it's mental. If you're in an abusive relationship and you think he's going to get better, he's only going to get worse. You need to get out. You need to get help. And with Dr. Melton, I know, people can call you and they can be out of that relationship, and they need to get out before something bad happens to them.
What is your first active memory of a domestic situation in the home, Brooke? Were you 5, 6? How old were you?
Honestly, I can't remember how old I was. I was very young. I remember my father had a drug and alcohol problem when I was growing up. Mm-hmm. And I must have been about 4 years old. The first memory I really remember my father beating my mother. I can't remember what they were fighting about, and I just remember him getting very mad, probably about him wanting to leave while he was in a drunken state, and he got mad and very physically abused my mother. He hit her, slapped her around, pulled her hair, told her if he wanted to leave, he could leave, and if he wanted to take me or my younger brothers, I was 4 at the time, and I had a few younger brothers with him, he could. And she wasn't going to tell him any different. That was probably the first memory I have of that.
And then as the years rolled on, the abuse intensified and happened very frequently, as I recall. Is that right?
Yeah, it did.
How often did it happen in the home? And what would be the triggers, typically?
Oh, goodness. I don't know. I don't really know why my dad was the way he was. He like I said, he battled his drug addiction substance abuse my whole life. And I remember being young and growing up, and my father was very abusive to my mother, and she was very submissive. And I was born, I feel like domestic violence is a generational curse. My story starts before I was even born. Both of my parents grew up in a very dysfunctional and abusive homes. And as a child, I remember my dad, he had struggled with drug and alcohol addiction. And I can remember as a child, my father being very verbally and mentally abusive, also physically abusive to my mother. I can remember him calling her horrible names, disrespecting her in front of people, and in front of my brothers and I. I can also remember him hitting her, beating her, slapping her around for things that I didn't even understand. And as a child, this was all normal to me. It was supposed to be accepted. My grandparents, my father's parents, would come over and say, "It's okay, don't tell anyone. This is okay, it's accepted. Don't tell anyone, it's a big secret." And, I didn't realize when my father was abusing my mother and treating her the way he was treating her, not only was it affecting her, but it was affecting us. And this abuse was pretty intense and pretty severe for the first couple years of my life. And, you know, it had an intense effect on my brothers and I. You know, we were being taught that it was okay to disrespect my mom. We had no respect for her. We fought with each other. We were disciplined, we weren't disciplined correctly. And we were taught that violence is the answer to your problems. And like I said before, all of this was just accepted, and it was my normal. I knew nothing else because that's what I grew up in. This abuse continued until I was about 8 years old, and my father, at this point, started abusing different substances. He started abusing pain pills. He had had about 4 DUIs, and he even lost his license for a couple of months, and my mom would have to get everyone up in the morning, and my brothers and I, because we were young, she couldn't leave us at home, and take him to work in the mornings. And the whole time we would be going to work, he would be cussing and screaming and just mad that he had lost his license, but it was his own fault. He started abusing pain pills, and the abuse just got really bad and out of control. And that was when my mom, she didn't really have a family of her own or parents of her own to really confide in. She started confiding in some of her friends. And one of her close friends was from an abusive home, and she actually told my mom about you, Dr. Melton, and your ministry, Shepherd's Rest Ministries. And she told my mom that she could get help and that she didn't have to stay in a home like that, and that my father couldn't beat her and abuse her, and that if he did, she could call the cops on him and they would make him stop. So I guess that after my mom was told that information, she still kind of tried to hold the family together and act like everything was okay and nothing was going on, until my parents' next big fight. They had a pretty big blowout, and I honestly don't even remember what they were fighting about. Can only assume it was probably about my father's drug addiction and finances and things of that nature. And this was a pretty intense fight and very vivid memories for me, and they still haunt me to this day. I can remember my mother and father screaming and yelling at each other in the kitchen, and I'm not even sure what about. And the next thing I know, my father is pushing and shoving my mother and slapping her around and just yelling at her. And my mom screamed to me and my brothers, "Call the cops, help me, get help, call 911. And my dad was so mad that she would even think to call the cops on him because he was hurting her. He went around the house and ripped all the phone cords out of the wall and told us, "We're not calling the cops, nobody's going to do anything." And he was so enraged at my mom for telling us to call the cops on him, that he started to violently beat her, pulling her all around the kitchen, pulling her hair. I mean, it was horrible. I remember as a child begging him, "Daddy, please stop hitting Mom. Please don't continue to hit Mom." And my brothers I was about 8, and my brothers were younger than me, and we're all begging him, "Please stop hurting her." And he's telling her that he's going to kill her. He'll never call the cops on her. And my mom yelled to us, "Go to the neighbor's house and get help. Go call 911. And when I remember leaving the house to run to the neighbor's house, I look back and my father actually has my mother pinned against the refrigerator with a knife at her throat, telling her he's going to kill her for calling the cops on him. Running over to the neighbor's house to call the cops, I just remember thinking, I hope my mom is still alive when they get here. I hope my mom is still alive when they get here. So we get to the neighbor's house and we call the police, and luckily they do get there in time. And my mom, although she's very badly beaten and banged up, she's okay and she's survived this particular event. And the cops told my father he had beaten her so bad that he couldn't stay there that night. He needed to leave and leave the home. And so my father left and went to his parents' house. And it was actually the very next day my mom decided that's it. And she took her friend's advice and contacted you, Dr. Melton. And she got in touch with you and talked with you and learned that she wasn't trapped there. All those lies my dad were telling her were not true. There was help for women like her. And she filed what's called a TPO for my father. And you and I both know what a TPO is a temporary protective order, which states that a batterer cannot come within so many yards of the person they've battered. They can't contact them or speak to them and things of that nature for a certain amount of time. And it's granted through the courts by a judge. And she also filed for a divorce because things were so out of control and she didn't want to live like that anymore. Well, during this time, this is also when you told my mom that she was scared for my brother and I's life. My brothers and I, she didn't want us going off and hanging out and being with my father while he was under the influence. She was afraid for us. And you also told her that she could have my father take drug tests before he could see us, and he would have to submit drug tests. So he started being court ordered to take drug tests, and he was doing pretty good for a little while. And we started going to family counseling with you. I was probably about 8 or 9. That was the first time that I heard that my family wasn't normal. That was the first time that I started hearing, it's not okay for your father to beat your mother. It's unacceptable. It's not okay for your father to beat you and your brother because you didn't throw a softball right. That's not okay. It's not okay to disrespect your mom. It's not okay to abuse her. And I found out that it's actually against the law. After being told by my father as children that women need to obey men and that men should be able to punish women, I found out that that's wrong. Well, my father did good for a few years, and he eventually convinced my mom that he could move back in and that things would be fine. And of course, he manipulated her. His parents came over, and they all talked her into dropping the divorce and allowing him to move back in. Over the next few years, about ages 10 to 14, my preteen years and my early teen years, my father was in and out of the house some because he continued to abuse. He didn't keep his promises to my mom. He continued to abuse my mom, and he abused my brothers and I too, physically. He would get mad and beat us because we didn't practice sports the way he wanted us to, because we, didn't hit a home run over the fence, just things that we shouldn't have been punished for. And I guess, that's what was going on in the family. Well, this is the age that I started dating. I was about 15 when I started dating. And although I knew about abuse and that it was unacceptable, I somehow still ended up with these very abusive men. My first couple of boyfriends were extremely abusive, and I actually had to get a TPO against one of my boyfriends at the age of 15. He was stalking me and calling the school, pretending to be my father, trying to take me out of my school, and actually threatened to kill me and kill my parents because they were keeping him from me. Again, I wouldn't have known how to protect myself or how to even take out a TPO against this abusive man had we not met you and learned this through you and your ministry. After that happened, I think this was sort of a turning point for my mother. After she seen that I was dating abusive men and that they were threatening to kill me, and she sees that my brothers are being taught to abuse women and disrespect them, and it's okay to abuse your mom or throw pizza in her face because you don't like what she said, she decided that, that's the turning point. I need to get out of this relationship. And she went and filed for divorce. By this point, my father's addiction was getting worse, and abuse in the home was pretty bad. I mean, it was getting to where it was probably every couple of weeks the cycle was repeating, and my father would, get mad and blow up, and then there would be the building phase, and then we'd have another fight. It was very often that the violence was happening. And my mother filed for divorce. And this time, my mom stayed strong. She had support from you and women that help you with through Shepherd's Rest Ministries. And she stayed strong, and she didn't believe all of his lies, even though he tried to convince her to let him come back. And she left and got out. She got that divorce finalized, and she got out of that. She got away from that cycle and got away from that violence. Congratulations, Mom. For me, that wasn't the end of my story. My story continues. When my parents' divorce was finalized, I was about 18 years old. I was a freshman in college, and I was in yet another abusive relationship. After the divorce, I was broken. It was hard to go through as a child. It was hard because although my father was abusive, I still loved him, and I didn't fully understand everything that was going on between him and my mother. And I wanted to be there for both of my parents. So after the divorce, I was hurt, and it was hard to go through as a family period. I was hurt about that and distracted in school by that, but also I have this abusive boyfriend at home who I was so wrapped up in at the time, and he would tell me, maybe if you were here, I wouldn't cheat on you. Maybe if you were here, I wouldn't want to do these things to you, and I would care about you and love you. So I was like, I need to go home and be with him. And so I decided that I'm going to leave school, even though I had a free ride to play softball and get a free education. So I called my mom and I said, I'm coming home. She said, well, you're not coming here. You need to stay in school. So I'm like, okay. I'm calling my dad and I tell him I'm going home. He's like, okay. So he lets me come home. And I get there, and I'll never forget, when I came home, my father sat me down at the table with a younger brother of mine and told me what had been going on. The abuse and craziness was way more. It was worse than I had ever imagined. I was informed that my father was buying marijuana and allowing my brother to sell it and use it and have parties there and buying alcohol for younger kids and allowing this abuse to go on in the home. Well, my brother's a high school student and condoning this behavior and saying it's okay. And that if I was going to live there, I'm not going to tell anyone. And if I did, I would be sorry that I told anyone. So, still so desperately wanting that acceptance from my father that I never really felt like I had as a little girl growing up, I'm like, okay, let's go along with this, that's fine. And so I want to fit in with them and fit in with my father and make him happy. And I start using marijuana and drinking alcohol and doing these things and hiding their secrets and covering it up. And I realized that I had taken the place of the woman in the home that, is trying to cover these secrets and trying to act like nothing's going on. Still, the story gets worse. Not only did my father do those things with me, but the abuse is getting more frequent. He's teaching younger brothers to abuse. They're getting in trouble for violence. And things are just spiraling out of control. Then my father, with his horrible drug addictions, introduces stronger drugs to my brother and I, and he uses them with us and teaches us how to use them. Why? So anyways, I get distracted for a few years and I'm using drugs with my father and I'm at an all-time low. I'm just broken. I have nothing. I'm using substances. I'm being abused by my father, my brother. Everything is just at an all-time low. And I'm like, how do I get out of this mess? What do I do? And then I remember, I can get out. I decide that I'm going to move out. I call my mom and tell her I need help. I got to get out of here. And I told her what was going on. I move out. I move in with my mom. And I started coming to counseling with you, Dr. Melton. You started to help me learn what was going on and break away from that craziness. I even lived in the transitional house of yours with Shepherdess Ministries for a while to help break free. Eventually I start to heal and I start to get a little better, and it's still a work every day, but without the help of you and Shepherd's Rest Ministries and many others in my life, I would not be where I am today. And I wanted to come here today and tell my story because I think it's so important that women get help. It's out there. Seek help. Ask questions. Talk to people. There are so many options. It's not just affecting the mother of the home or the woman that's being abused. If you have children, it's affecting them too. You're teaching them behaviors for the rest of their life. And it's so hard to get out of that situation and break it the older you get. Get help now. Talk to someone now. Thanks to Dr. Melton and Shepherd's Rest Ministries, I and my mother am a survivor, and I'm alive today because of you. Have broken the cycle of abuse, and anyone else can too. That's it.